So this is a new way of reaching lots of schools in southern Alberta, and we're really excited to see so many schools on the webinar today. My name is Nora Fines, and I'm a health promotion coordinator and a registered dietitian with Alberta Health Services. My job is to support schools in the area of health and wellness. This year, it was my goal to target my support to those schools who have the school nutrition grants from Alberta Education. So today is one of the first ways that we are aiming to do that. Joining me today is Michelle Letourneau, a registered dietitian who currently works in Brooks, and I'm so happy that she's able to come today and share her expertise with us around nutrition resources that your school can use to support their program. Earlier in the year, we sent out a survey to assess what learning and support needs some of our schools in the west part of southern Alberta had this year, so to ensure that the grants would run smoothly. From the survey, we determined the following 3 priority areas for this first webinar. We hope that you will gain connection to other schools who are doing similar work in their programming, and that you will be introduced to some new nutrition resources. Lastly, we also hope that you will have time to ask any questions that you have about nutrition or how to make your program better. Happy to introduce Michelle again, who will be speaking to the nutrition resources. Please enter your questions in the question and answer box in the bottom middle pod. So take it away, Michelle.
Perfect. Thank you, Nora. And thanks to all of you for joining us today. I'm Michelle Letourneau, a population and public health dietitian from Alberta Health Services. I work in Brooks and recently took over this position from Devin Choi, so I'm probably a new name for some of you. If you're from Medicine Hat, you may have noticed that your public health dietitians, Marcia Stodalka and Pat McIntosh, are also on the line. I'll be highlighting some of the Alberta Health Services resources that you can use to implement nutrition programs in your school. We know that school nutrition programs aren't just about providing food. They're about providing nutritious food that will help students learn better, nourish their bodies, and help them build healthy habits. To support you with this, I'll introduce the Healthy Eating Starts Here website and show you some useful content from it. I'll discuss the Alberta Nutrition Guidelines for Children and Youth and explain how to figure out if packaged foods or a recipe that you have meet these guidelines. And I'll briefly address how to find out if your school needs a food handling permit. The school nutrition resource list in the downloads area, so that's on the right-hand side of your screen, has a link to everything we'll discuss today and a lot more. We'll also have a PDF of this presentation available in that same box, and in there you'll find the links to the resources throughout the slide deck and in the reference section. So pictured in front of you is the main page of the Alberta Health Services Healthy Eating Starts Here website. If you click on the schools icon, you can find Alberta Health Services nutrition resources for your school. Under the schools icon, you'll find manuals and toolkits, including the school breakfast program toolkit. Whether you've got a breakfast or lunch program or snack program going on, the breakfast program toolkit, that's the one in the middle, is a great place to start because it covers the basics of just about everything you'll need to consider, from basic food safety to menu ideas to student satisfaction survey templates. If you're interested in healthy snacks, the Snack Shack manual can also be a good place to start. This manual is specifically about starting a healthy snack canteen, but the recipes can be used for any model of snack distribution. If you have student volunteers involved in food prep, which I heard a few of you do, the Cooking Club manual, that's the one on the left side, contains useful resources like, for example, a food safety quiz for the students and a kitchen duties sign-up sheet. So hopefully these manuals can give you some inspiration to get started. The toolkits I was just talking about are really helpful for all of the semantics of running a food program. But on a very basic level, we're trying to use these tools to provide nutritious meals for students that will help them learn and grow. Canada's Food Guide is a tool which outlines which foods are healthy choices and in what amounts. It's important to remember that each food group from this food guide provides a variety of nutrients necessary to meet a child's needs. And just as a review, the food groups from the food guide are vegetables and fruit, grain products, milk and alternatives, and meat and alternatives. A healthy lunch or breakfast contains 3 or 4 food groups, and a healthy snack has 2 food groups. Combining food groups actually helps people to feel fuller for longer, which is super important for all the growing kids in your classrooms. Also, providing a variety of foods from the food groups will help kids meet their nutrient needs and help build familiarity and hopefully acceptance and enjoyment of healthy food. And I did hear from some of you at the round table that you're already seeing these effects where kids are trying new foods and they're really learning to enjoy these healthy foods and have them in their life. So hopefully you can create really long-lasting impacts with what you're doing at your schools, which is amazing. As an aside, you can actually order the food guide for free online for your students, and it comes in 10 languages. This is the Alberta Nutrition Guidelines for Children and Youth, or ANGCY for short. I can see the acronym kind of got hidden behind the image. And this is a resource manual that complements Canada's Food Guide, but what it really does is it defines healthy choices for schools, as well as childcare and recreation centers. Nutrition Guidelines for Children and Youth separate healthy foods from less healthy food by putting all food into 3 categories based on specific nutrient criteria. Choose Most Often foods are all recommended as healthy choices in Canada's Food Guide, and the recommendation for elementary schools is that all foods offered regularly are these Choose Most Often foods. Choose Sometimes foods still provide beneficial nutrients, but are higher in added sugar, unhealthy fat, or salt. The Choose Least Often foods are very low in nutrients and higher in calories, sugar, fat, and salt. Choose Least Often foods are not foods that are recommended for schools. To sort the food into Choose Most Often, Choose Sometimes, or Choose Least Often, Alberta Health has used specific nutrient criteria found on nutrition facts tables. Each food group and type of food, for example, whole grain baked products, has their own criteria required to be a Choose Most Often food. The image that you see here is of the nutrient criteria required for a baked product, like for example a granola bar, to fit into the Choose Most Often category. So you can see that for each item, for example fat or sodium, they kind of have a cap on it to suggest this is the most that we want for it to be able to fit into a Choose Most Often category. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But you can compare food labels to these criteria, like the labels that we have from the ANGCY manual. You might be wondering what to do with food that doesn't have a label, like an apple. Luckily, plain fruit and vegetables always fit Choose Most Often in the ANGCY. I'll show you how to check recipes in a minute. You might also run into the issue where the serving size on the package is a lot different than the serving size on the ANGCY criteria, which is based on food guide servings. So for example, in the picture, we have half a muffin or some quick bread, and the serving size is 35 grams. So let's say you have a muffin that's twice that size. You might have to do some division in this case. And we do recognize this can be tricky at first. So if you're not confident with this process, you can absolutely get in contact with your public health dietitian. We'd love to help you out. We don't have the capacity to analyze your entire menu for you, but we can definitely help you to build skills in this area. This is the Healthy Food Checker. Some of you might be familiar with it. And it's from the Healthy Eating Starts Here website. And instead of comparing the criteria from a nutrition facts table manually, you can also use this tool. To use the food checker, you'll need a label with ingredients and the nutrition facts table. This is the label from a real granola bar. I want to use the food checker to see if it's a grain option that I could provide in an elementary school lunch. All right, we're going to put this into practice here. First, we would select the group that our food item is from. And in this case, I'm using a granola bar. So I would click Grain Products. And you could also use the Canada Food Guide if you're not really sure where the food fits. The food checker will then ask you if there are whole grains in the ingredient list. And on the granola bar, it said rolled oats. And all Choose Most Often grain options must be made with whole grains, which is why the food checker asked this question. And because the first ingredient in the granola bar was rolled oats, I can say, yep, this is a whole grain, so I can click yes. The ANGCY actually has a whole list of ways that labels can say they have whole grains. You can find this list on the Choose Most Often grain product page, so I could check if I wasn't sure whether oats were a whole grain. Now I typed in on the right-hand side the rest of the nutrition facts from the label, and I'm going to click Calculate. Ta-da! I have a Choose Most Often granola bar, which is excellent, because that means that I could offer it to students as part of a nutrition program at school. Now I do have another question, and I see that Nora has it on the side here. It says, to enhance our school nutrition program, I plan to use, and then you can choose all that apply. So we've listed the Alberta Nutrition Guidelines for Children and Youth, or the ANGCY, as you might call it. The recipes on the Healthy Eating Starts Here website, the Breakfast Cooking Club or Snack Shack Manual, or Canada's Food Guide. So you can check all that apply. All right, we'll just give you a couple more seconds. All right, I'm going to end the poll here for you. Okay, it looks like the vast majority of you will be using the Alberta Nutrition Guidelines for Children and Youth, so that's excellent to hear. I know it can be a little tricky at times, but it really is a great resource. I know that it looks like some of you are already aware of the recipes on Healthy Eating Starts Here website, so that's really amazing as well. And it looks like some of you will be using the manuals and toolkits too. In practice, certain foods that are sometimes associated with kids' lunches might be Choose Least Often options. For example, sandwich meats like bologna or salami will likely fit under Choose Least Often because they're usually high in salt and fat and very low in protein. To find a Choose Most Often option, you'll have to read the labels. So you can look for the least processed meats, if possible, like the sliced chicken breast on the right-hand side, because these are most likely to have less salt and fat added to them. If you can't find something in your community that meets the Choose Most Often guidelines, keep in mind that companies want to sell you products, so you might be surprised at what they can bring in for you or make if you ask. For example, some schools have asked a butcher to make sausages that fit the Choose Most Often guidelines, and they've actually provided them with a copy of what those guidelines are so they could use them. If you group together with other schools, you'll be purchasing a higher volume, so it is possible that sellers will be even more motivated to meet your requests, and you might really be surprised at what these sellers are able to do. Something else that can trick schools up is that anything labeled as a punch, cocktail, or aid, like lemonade, is unlikely to contain much real fruit juice. Only 100% real juice is a Choose Most Often option for schools. Canada's Food Guide includes up to half a cup of 100% fruit juice per day as a healthy option. White milk, fortified soy beverage, and water are also Choose Most Often options for kids to drink with meals served at school. There's also some snack-type foods that fit into Choose Least Often, and I have them pictured here on the left side of the screen. And on the right side, I have some options that could fit in Choose Most Often. For some nutritious snack options, for example, the low-fat cheese, it can sometimes be difficult to find a product that fits into the Choose Most Often category. So remember, if you're struggling to meet the guidelines, you don't have to completely abandon them. Just do your best, and if you're stuck, you can ask your public health dietitian for some practical advice. Here are the Healthy Eating Starts Here websites, and I'm so happy that some of you already know about them. And these websites have already been analyzed according to the nutrition guidelines for children and youth, and they're all either Choose Most Often or Choose Sometimes options. And they're not scaled for school-sized crowds, unfortunately, but they can give you some good ideas, and you could even try scaling the recipes up yourself. This is an example recipe from the website that has all 4 food groups, including vegetables in a breakfast dish, and meat to choose most often in the ANGCY. If you serve it with a fruit and a glass of milk, you've got yourself a well-rounded meal. We also have some other recipes like, let's say, the Easy Mini Quiche Muffins that contain 4 food groups. And those ones, just like this one, could be frozen and reheated and would probably still be delicious. I saw that Catherine Rind had in the comments, she's saying there's several apps that will do this, so Nutrients is a good one. And I think she might have been talking about apps that will analyze your food based on the nutrients. So this is another app that does something similar. It's called the eTracker, and this is how you can tell where your own recipe, so something that doesn't have a label, fits into the ANGCY food categories. You can use this eTracker from Dietitians of Canada to analyze your recipe, and then you generate the nutrition facts table, so that one would be on the far right. And then you can take these nutrition facts and you can put them into the Healthy Food Checker, just like we did with the granola bar. Or you can analyze them manually using the criteria outlined in that ANGCY manual. So that is how you figure out if your own recipe you're using meets the guidelines. I know that some people like to see a sample menu. It's good to see the actual thing put together. And this one here is from the Breakfast Program Toolkit, so some of you might have actually seen it before. I brought it up because it's a great idea to plan a menu like this based on the food groups. And this way can help you with a brainstorming process and can also help you with preparing a list for tender or a list for grocery shopping. You could also ask a food provider to show you how they plan to offer the 3 or 4 food groups for meals by asking for them to draft you up an outline that looks a bit like this. If you already have a menu, and it sounds like a lot of you are doing great and already have menus going on, you can consider sharing with other schools as well, so you can learn from each other and combine resources. So this one here is a sample no-cook menu from the Breakfast Program Toolkit. And then on the next page, we have a sample full cook menu, and it's also split out by food group to give you an idea of what that would look like. Speaking of a full cook menu versus no cook, depending on where the food is made and what types of preparation a food requires, your school might need a food handling permit. Dietitians are knowledgeable about food safety and can help you out with this, but environmental public health officers grant these permits, so they are your go-to in this regard. This here on the screen is the environmental public health page on the Alberta Health Services website. There's an environmental public health officer assigned to all communities, so you can find yours with the resources here. If you click on the school food activities, that's the one I have a little arrow to it, you can see a handout that'll help you self-identify whether your school needs a permit. And once you find that out, you can also use these resources to find your environmental public health officer. This brings me to the end of the nutrition content for the webinar today. And I hope that what I discussed meets your needs, and I hope that you learned some new practical tips about the Alberta Nutrition Guidelines and the resources available to you. We do have time for our questions, so we'll move into that part. But if you do have questions after this webinar, contact your community's public health dietitians. If you're in Brooks and surrounding area, that's me. You can also get in touch with your Healthy Child and Youth Contact, and they'll connect you to your dietitian if you aren't familiar with them. I'll hand it back over to you, Nora.
Thanks, Michelle. And it looks like we only have 2 questions so far, unless I missed any in the chat box. So we'll start with the first one, which seems to me to be a question for the audience. How are schools feeding so many students on a regular basis? So, Chris, are you able to speak on mic just to kind of expand a little bit on your question?
I guess not. Okay, that's fine. So how are schools feeding so many students on a regular basis? I'm guessing, Chris, you mean in terms of capacity and how they're doing that each day? So I'd like to invite anyone on the call who might have some experience with the capacity kind of challenge at a school to either speak up or respond to Chris's question in the chat box about facilities and cost is what he's specifically looking for. Okay, Cindy, thank you for your response. Cindy is from Irving School in Prairie Rose School Division, and she says their CTF junior high students are using their time in their option class to do homemade snacks for the school, which is a great way to include students in the process.
Nora, Terry Lynn. We
Go ahead.
Our local grocery stores shop for us, and we just pick them up on the Monday for the week. So we put in our weekly grocery list, and they do all the shopping. We just pick up the food, and then we have hired 2 food service workers that are there Monday to Thursday from 9 until about 1, cooking the food for the kids at Central School.
Thank you, Terry Lynn. And it looks like Dave Fender from WA Day School has a similar comment talking about those community connections with the local grocery store and how they're really helping them to meet their specific food requests. And Michelle, I believe you talked about another community support kind of promising practice with the sausages that are being custom made in the Medicine Hat area. If you have anything to add there. Sure, I know that Marcia actually knows quite a bit about that. Marcia, if you're able to use your mic, would you be able to speak to that?
Can you hear me?
Yes, you sound...
Okay. Well, I think you're probably referring to, we have a local butcher in the area called Deerview Meats. And so that was, actually it was not directly with one of the schools that initiated this, but when Medicine Hat Food Bank started up their school lunch program probably about 5 years ago now, they were trying to find meats that met the Alberta Nutrition Guidelines, and they had approached Deerview Meats at that time to try and see if they could design a sausage that would allow them to be served in the lunches. So I haven't spoke to them lately, but I believe they had done that, and I haven't verified that it actually meets the ANGCY, but I was told that they had done that, and it's possible that some of our schools are now accessing that too, and I may not be aware of that either, but that was a way where they were ordering quite a large volume of meat, so that was one way. When they looked at the products in the stores, they were finding just limited options, so they kind of opted to go that route. So it might be something other communities can do as well with local butchers or local meat processors.
Thank you so much, Marcia. I knew that you had all the details on that, and I didn't know if I could do it full justice to explain how the process went.
Okay. Yeah.
And I have another school in mind that might be willing to share their promising practice. Heather Paul from Fleetwood, if you're able to speak on mic, I know that you have some community connections with a local bakery. And if you're not able to speak, maybe Lindsay Spring could speak on behalf for that school. Just talking about some community connections there.
Heather, looks like you should be able to go ahead.
Hi, I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, so far we've gotten Cobb's bread once a week. We go and what they don't sell during the day, they'll donate to community organizations throughout the week. So they kind of split up for all different ones. So we have Monday nights, and they provide us with bread, usually enough for the entire week to feed different. Twice a week we do the whole school feed, and then 3 times a week we have kind of come in and pick up food, right? So that's the only one we have right now, I think, unless Lene has come up with some more.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I also see some other comments, answers for this question in the chat box, so thank you very much to those that have some ideas. I think we'll move on to our second question unless anyone's dying to speak on mic. I don't see anybody as active speaker, but please feel free to interrupt if you have a comment. So our second question is, how do schools provide options for those with food allergies like gluten, lactose, intolerant, etc.? Now, Michelle, would you like to take this, and then we'll see if we have any comments from other schools and how they address this issue or this challenge in the chat box as well.
Sure. Hi, Elaine. So schools aren't obligated to provide options for those with food allergies, but of course it's really nice to be able to. So, for example, I know a lot of schools have no peanuts, so that helps with the food allergies, but for really specific ones, it can become really difficult, and sometimes it's just not feasible unless you also have, let's say, a fruit basket, because generally those aren't a common allergen, so often kids with food allergies can still take something. Another one I know you have down there is gluten. Again, that one's also really difficult, and a lot of gluten-free foods are expensive, so it's definitely not possible for everybody, but some of those really basic foods like vegetables or fruit can be enjoyed by everybody and have a really low risk of contamination. For lactose intolerant children, I do know of some schools that are providing a fortified soy beverage, so that can help as well, and usually that's a little bit less expensive than the lactose-free milk. Does anyone else have any input of how they handle this? I hope that answers your question. It's just, it would be great, but it's just not practical for all schools.
If I could just interject, Michelle, it's Marcy. Can you hear me?
Yes, you said.
Okay. I just wanted to, you mentioned something there, I just wanted to sort of emphasize a little bit with the schools, was about the idea of the cross-contamination. And I think I'm sure that the schools might have already had some experience with parents and students having expectations around being able to provide things like gluten-free. But if you have children who are truly require, like that have celiac disease, then if your school is still providing other foods that are not gluten-free, it would be really almost impossible for you to provide gluten-free products, even if you wanted to. So because of the cross-contamination that is there, so I think what I'm just trying to emphasize is that while it's desirable when it's practical to try to do some of those allergy avoidance foods, sometimes it really isn't even doable from a school's perspective unless you're planning to convert your entire school to something like that, because some food sensitivities are just so sensitive that even the slightest using the same knife or the same cutting board could cause a major problem for a student. So I just want to emphasize that point, and maybe somebody else has some ideas about ways they've done that. Like if they were if they purchased prepackaged foods that came in prepackaged and there was no potential for cross-contamination, it could be possible, but if you were making the products in-house, that would be extremely difficult. Does that make sense?
Yes, thanks, Marcia.
Yeah.
I'm also noticing...
That sounds great, Marcia.
I'm also noticing that some
I think
schools have commented in the question and answer box things like most schools are avoiding nuts and using things like pea butters or wow butter instead of peanut butter, but kind of going to the gluten intolerance or lactose intolerant options only as needed. So that would be sort of a general comment from a few different individuals. And I think we have time for one more question before we just kind of wrap things up here. So, Michelle, we have a question from, let me see if I can find it here. Catherine Ryan says, I understand that granola bars contain grain, but they are also pretty high in sugar and fat. I was just wondering if anyone else is trying not to use them. Also peanut butter, as we are a nut-free school. So would you like to speak to that, either Marcia or Michelle?
Sure, this is Michelle here. That's an awesome question. And that's why I chose granola bars, just because they can be one of the biggest challenges, because a lot of them, that's true, they are really high in sugar sometimes, and they can also be high in fat and salt as well. But we have a section for them in the ANGCY that has pretty strict guidelines. So to actually find that granola bar in the store that fit the guidelines, I did have to look around for a little while. So you can find ones that are healthy and will meet the guidelines. But you're completely right. It is something that you'll really have to watch out for in order to choose a healthy one that would be appropriate as a choose most often item. And again, with the peanut butter, that wow butter is awesome. It's actually from Legal, so it is from Alberta. And I do see another person asking where you can get it in large quantities. You could probably try contacting the producer. But if anybody else has actually done this and been able to get a whole bunch, we'd love to hear.
And we do have some comments really seeing there's a lot of strength and there's going to be a lot of really good information kind of collected through this webinar that we'll be sending out in the minutes. So we will be certain to write kind of the school's comments to the different questions and who made the comment in our minutes so that everyone who participated in this webinar will be able to see what schools were thinking about these questions, because we just are limited in time and capability today, and we do have only 4 minutes left in the webinar. So I'll invite you to read the chat box to see your answers and then to check the minutes that we will be emailing out afterwards. I did notice there was one question asking if the downloadable files that are in the download pod will be included with the minutes, and yes, they will be. So if you're registered for this webinar, you'll be on our distribution list unless you ask not to be. We'll be sending out all of that information. So that brings me to my next poll before we close off here. So what other things do you need support with? And now this is a short answer question, so you can type into this poll anything that you feel is unanswered from today, or things that you might need more support with. And I know that we didn't get to all of the questions in the question and answer box. We will not forget your questions. We will be including them in the minutes or in an email, some information. So your questions will be recognized. We can definitely... Yes?
Sorry, I just thought while people are typing, I might mention that Alberta Ed had their meeting in Calgary, and many of the people that are probably online or in this webinar might have been, or they might have had a district representative, but Alberta Ed has requested that I set up a team drive for anyone who wishes to be a part or is a part of the nutrition grant. And we want to share menus as well as topics in regards to the report card or rubric that they'll be assessing districts on. So if people want, maybe they can send their name to you if they weren't at that meeting and they want to be included in the team drive.
Okay. So for anyone who couldn't hear, Terry Lynn has a Google Drive with information that she's willing to share. So if you'd like to be part of that Google Drive, you can certainly, we'll be sending out that information on how to join that Google Drive folder. And I just want to bring up one more question for the group before we close. So it looks like one school would like some more support with food school permits. And we will certainly have that. It's the link to that website that Michelle talked about would be hyperlinked in the PowerPoint that we went over today, the PowerPoint slides. But we can certainly connect with you about that as well. Lastly, we want to know how you would like to receive information. So we know that not everyone is comfortable with Google Drive necessarily, so that's why we wanted to know, is Google Drive going to be the best way to share resources and information? Would you prefer just simple emails with attachments? Would you like to have some dialogue together, perhaps in a Facebook group? Would you like to have more webinars? Would you prefer in-person meetings? Now they would have to be in Medicine Hat or Lethbridge probably. So that might involve some travel. But we appreciate your feedback on how we can support you further. Because I think there's lots of rich discussion and sharing that can happen among this group, and we're really happy to see the participation today and the sharing of information. Okay, so it looks like email is the preferred way, and there's still some interest in Google Drive and some more online webinars, so that's good. We're going to take this information and come up with a few more events and ways to share resources with you. It's good to see that 100% would like emails with resources, because we'll send out the links. Maybe we'll do both Google Drive and email so that you have it in both ways. And I want to close today's webinar by just thanking everyone for sharing, whether it was typing in the chat, the question box, completing the polls, or just listening in. We really appreciate all of your time. I want to also invite anyone who hasn't heard about our upcoming event called Food at School, How Do We Measure Up, with Dr. Kim Rain from the University of Alberta, happening on November 22nd. And the flyer is in the download box, or the registration link is hyperlinked in the slides when you download them. Or if you'd like more information, please connect with any of us on that. That event will be in Lethbridge. But anyone willing to travel to Lethbridge is welcome. And we've got our contact information if you do have any more questions for us or any comments. But I think that'll be the close of today's webinar. Thank you to Michelle and Marcia from the Medicine Hat area and Brooks for answering some questions, and we'll certainly take a closer look at the questions that were included in the chat and the question and answer box to make sure that everyone's burning questions are answered. And without further ado, we'll just say goodbye and have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much, everyone.